we're not on. You want, now we're on.
I'll tell another story about Gary.
Okay, we're back on.
Another story about Gary was that he was very competitive about awards, to the point where, like, when it came time for, like, scripts and stuff, you know, we would want to submit. He would say he wouldn't let us submit our scripts and stuff because he wanted to win the awards all for himself. And they used to have a thing called the Cable Ace Awards, and we were nominated. It's Gary Shandling's show on Showtime was nominated for a Cable Ace Award, which was supposed to be like the Emmys for cable. And we all went, and everyone was shocked, but only Gary was crushed by the fact that we lost to a show called Blackadder, which we had never heard of. And it was on A&E or something like that back in the day. So he was just livid all night. He said, I want everyone in my office Monday morning at 10 o'clock, we're going to watch an episode of Blackadder, whatever the fuck that is. Now, not only was this a better show than it's Gary Shandling's show, it really is one of the finest things ever done, most imaginative, well-written. He picked probably the best episode that they ever did, which was the one where Robbie Coltrane plays Ben Johnson, and I think Ben Johnson, and he wrote the dictionary, and the idiot burned the dictionary, so Blackadder had to stay up all night writing a dictionary, and he says, you know, so we were all at the writers' table, and Gary puts this thing in, and, you know, a bunch of intelligent comedy writers were kind of transported and enjoyed the thing. And then some giggles started, and then some people started to laugh, and Gary went, fuck you, fuck all of you, and he stormed out of the room.
Wow.
That's scary.
But you were nominated for one of your episodes. It's Gary's and Angelica's show.
Oh, I know, yeah. They said
they
said that show was unairable. That was an Emmy nomination,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. No, I know. Yeah. They said it was unairable. That's scary, and then it got an Emmy nomination. That was with my wife at the time. Jennifer Tilly played Angelica. And she had to use a vacuum cleaner in a scene, and she clearly had no idea how to use a vacuum cleaner. The prop person had to explain how to do it.
Let's move on to Tracy Ullman.
Okay.
Now you said, did you start as a consultant there?
I started as a consultant, but I think I became, I don't know. This is all a long time ago. My life has taken some twists and turns since then. But when did I become executive producer?
1987, I believe.
Oh, I don't know about that.
So it was pretty fast. If you
Okay.
were lead consultant.
Yeah, yes, I was consulting on the Tracy Ullman show at the same time I was doing It's Gary Shandling's show, and they let me direct on the Tracy Ullman show, so that's when I started directing.
Is that something you always wanted to do?
No, not at all. It was something that I felt I should do and learn about the process. And then I knew at the time they were hiring TV directors to do features, and I thought, maybe I could be one of those guys. And it was also, when you did the Tracy Ullman show, you got to do, you were on a new set every week. You were doing different characters every week. You were doing dance numbers. You were doing blue screen. You were doing special effects shots. So it was really like a great education in how to be a director and how to, do a lot of different things in your week. And we shot more than a week of the show. We shot a show and a half every week.
Can you talk about the process in terms of writing that show? Because it was kind of a variety show. So how did
it was a variety show, but but the sketches were written with the same process that we did the half-hour shows, In others, we would beat them out as a group. Writers would go off and write them. We would polish them as a group. We would hear the actors read them, and then we would rewrite as a staff during the course of the week. So, whereas like on a lot of shows, variety shows, your sketch is your sketch and no one is allowed to touch it the way it is at Saturday Night Live, this was the opposite. And again, like if everybody's great, both systems will work. If everybody isn't great, then some people need to have some help on their sketches.
And how was it on the Elman show? Which
Everybody
one
was good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And talk about working with Tracy herself.
I thought she was, my thing is, like, actors that get you free laughs, that find stuff that wasn't really in the material, those are the biggest laughs, and Tracy just always, she made those things better than what they were. The hardest working performer I've ever been around. She would do 2 dance numbers, prosthetic makeup, different characters, different memorized. I mean, it was just the amount of work she put into an episode was incredible. And like I say, it wasn't just one episode. It was an episode and a half that we would shoot every week. And she had an enthusiasm for what she was doing. I think she's, there's a handful of people that I would say are all-time TV greats, and I think she's one of them. I think she's just an awesome, amazing talent.
And what about
singing, dancing, comedy, and I guess if you want to count ad-libbing at the end of the show.
Oh, was that all ad-libbed?
Yes.
Yeah.
No one wrote that.
Well, talk about some of the sketches themselves. Were there any that you wrote that you really loved?
Do you have any names of them for me? Because I don't really.
There was the gardener on the floor.
The gardener on the floor.
She plays the mystery writer with the.
Oh, that wasn't a good one at all. That was I was reading these things called Minute Mysteries,
Mm-hmm.
and so I wrote one, and they felt it ended up being like a parody of a Miss Marple thing, which it wasn't supposed to be. It was supposed to be a real one, and so they put in a song from Les Mis at the end. So no, that's not a pleasant memory.
How about the characters like Francesca?
Francesca was a great character, and very ahead of its time. And we did I like the one I directed with Betty Thomas, the volleyball coach. I thought that was good. But Tracy, and I don't know how old she was then, but we would put her in a class with real 13 and 14-year-olds, and she became one of them. It was eerie transformation, and she was being raised by 2 gay parents, 2 dudes. I forget their names, but Dan Castellaneta and who's the other kid?
Is it Sam McMurray?
Sam McMurray played them, and Sam played the feminine one, the femme side, to great, broad exaggeration.
Were there any other sketches that really appealed to you?
Yeah, maybe at the time. This is you can throw some names out at me. I'm happy to try.
Okay. What about Julie Kavner, another member of the ensemble, working with her?
Well, Julie, of course. Like when I think of Julie, I think of her more as Marge Simpson, and that was a very pleasant interaction. And she did a great job as Marge Simpson, and her sisters, Patty and Selma. Just showing that I do know some, I can remember some trivia.
Okay, well, speaking of The Simpsons, let's talk about that, and let's start with those interstitials that started on the Tracy Ullman show. Did you have anything to do with those when?
Well, we would
production
punch
those?
them up and write them, but as far as the design or the creation of the family, no. You know, they weren't the only, at first there were two different animated interstitials on, they would alternate. I think a cartoonist named P.K. Brown had a doctor with a Swahili name, a psychiatrist or something. But that one didn't catch on. The network liked The Simpsons and that rascally brat, Bart.
Did you think that there would be any future to it?
You mean like a series?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So how did that come about?
Garth Ancier at Fox said, you know, they used to do primetime shows and animation shows in primetime, and this is a property. And Jim Brooks knew about my experience in animation, and so I think it made sense to him, like, to have someone that knew how to do a sitcom that also knows how they make Saturday morning TV shows. And so that seemed doable. And we went in and told them some ideas for the show. And, but it was, I think Garth was the guy that really saw the potential. I know I didn't. I saw the potential for the show being good and the show being fun, but I never saw, I didn't think it was going to be a hit. I didn't think it was not going to be a hit. I just thought, like, hey, who knows? But I'm a gambler, and I've always been one, so I just, you know, I'll roll the dice with Jim Brooks and something new. When we went in to pitch the show, and this was telling him it's, you know, oh, it's set in a nuclear power plant, and Bart goes to Springfield Elementary School, and, you know, just all the basic structure of, you know, what this thing was going to be like, that it was going to be half-hour stories, things like that, which are real questions when, you know, as opposed to, you know, if you're building a sitcom around a stand-up comedian, you kind of know what it's going to be about. This was a little different, but we went into Barry Diller's office, and he's have you interviewed Barry?
No.
Really?
Turn us down.
You should.
He turned us down.
He turns you down? Oh, well then I'm done. I'm not going to do it if he didn't do it. But he's very intimidating. Have you heard that about him?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So he heard, you know, this is a meeting this is about a new show called The Simpsons. This is Sam Simon. He's going to run the show. And blah, 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 blah. And in his mind, which was, you know, he had a busy schedule and wasn't paying complete attention, but he thought the name of the show was The Simons. And so, and everyone was scared to correct him. So the whole meeting he was going, well, when I turn into an episode of The Simons, what are the Simons going to be doing? And everyone was going, well, the Simons will be doing what the average American family is doing. They will be eating dinner around the table. So we sold a show called The Simons, not The Simpsons. And then at the end of the meeting, Barry Diller got very quiet and introspective. He used to have a little teletype, like in Times Square, that ran across his desk, but only he could see it. It ran news headlines, and something clearly took the wind out of his sails, and he was quiet for a couple minutes, and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, Halston is dead." So I always know where I was on the day that Halston died.
So talk about creating that world, though. I mean, you know, you said Springfield, for instance. Now, how did you decide, you know, nuclear power plant, all that stuff? Where did that come from?
Well, the name came from a book. It was called The Most Common, or in other words, Springfield just there were more Springfields than any other town name in the United States. It was a book that Matt Groening brought in, so we picked Springfield because it was the most common name. Now, Springfield has one of everything. You know, it's got a community center, it's got a stadium, it's got a football stadium, it's got a drag track, you know, it's got a dog track. So it was this malleable thing that could do whatever we wanted it to, but we did think it was supposed to be America. And it became, you know, it became humorous that they had a TV station, and a TV network, and a cartoon studio, and whatever you needed was right there for you.
And what about the nuclear power plant?
That was supposed to be, there was the early concept of the show was a more sour show than we did. So it was supposed to be like this town is a dump, because it's a tire fire that's been raging for 50 years, and a nuclear power plant, and you know, so that's a little bit of a vestigial organ from the earlier concepts of the show, because it's supposed to be uplifting and happy, and we love our characters, and we want good things to happen to them, and like earlier, I think the idea of an animated version of Married with Children was something that was on a lot of people's minds, and that's what would make the animation outrageous, is because they would be sour like that. But that's not something we ever really did.
In terms of the development as well, talk about the characters, how you kind of changed them from what they were in those interstitials to actual
Well, they
characters.
couldn't really be characters in the interstitials, so it's like not really fair to compare them. The critical, Jim Brooks came in one day and said, Lisa should be a genius. And, you know, and I said, hey, Jim Brooks is a genius, because it's like, why not? There you go. A perfect idea, makes complete sense. Now because you know, her and Bart in the short ones are just two sides of the same coin. They're just two brats. And now you got someone sensitive. Now you got someone that's calling her dad on stuff, and it's just, you know, there you go. That's great. Now, I'm not sure how many times the parents even talked in the interstitials. It's not a lot. But I think that because none of us had kids at the time we were doing the show, the perspective on it was a parent's perspective or an adult's perspective on, you know, and not, it wasn't as well observed about child rearing, except for what Jim Brooks would put in. So that's something that should have gotten better on the show. I haven't seen it in a long time, but I know that it was more of a fantasy and more based on other fiction than it was based on the real life problems of raising kids, which frankly is not funny. It's just stuff that's so annoying you want to kill them. there's no wit to it, there's no, there's no happy ending to it. You just like go to bed and hope it doesn't happen again the next day.
What about the look of the show in terms of, finessing
David
that?
Silverman had a big hand in that. And I designed a lot of characters.
Which one specifically?
Oh, I don't know, tons of them. Mr. Burns is the most popular one, or the one that's been in the most episodes, but a lot of them. He was supposed to look like Edward G. Robinson, and I thought he should be more vulture-like.
Did you actually draw him out?
Yeah. Yeah, the character designers, when they couldn't really, we would like approve stuff. We would say, no, this isn't right, no, this isn't right. And at some point they would say, well, what do you want? And I would just do a quick sketch on an envelope or something and send it to them. And then at some point they would ask me to do it, and save themselves the trouble.
Talk about, what was the relationship then between you and Jim Brooks and Matt Groening as this was all being developed?
Well, I was kind of in the middle doing everything and dealing with Matt's input and figuring out how to use Jim for story and things like that. But then I was also, directing the voices, running the writing room, breaking the stories, approving the storyboards, and doing the editing. So, I was interacting with them whenever they got involved in this stuff here, but I was ultimately responsible for that stuff.
And you put together that core of writers, the writers' room.
I did, but a lot of them worked for a magazine called Army Man that George Meyer created. So I was basically just hiring the staff of a magazine that was very funny. And I used to always say, George, what happened to your magazine? And he would go, oh, I don't know, I'll get back around to it. And I didn't. Then someone said, you kind of put them out of business. But I don't think anybody minded. I think they ended up making more money on The Simpsons. John Schwartzwelder, John Vitti, George Meyer. I'm trying to think who else worked for Army Man, but certainly those three.
And how much of your earlier animation experience did you actually use
A lot.
for this?
A lot.
Anything specific?
Well, I just knew I just knew what it was. I knew what a storyboard was because I had done storyboards. I knew, and when people come into an animated show, like a lot of it is just like, they don't know how to look at a storyboard. They don't know how to look at an animatic. They'll say, oh, you say, look, you're not going to see things move. You're not going to see, this is going to look completely different when and they go, okay, and then they're lost. They promised and they swore and they claimed like they understood what the hell was going on, but they go, well, why didn't he cross on the thing? You go, we told you, that's not in the show at this point.
Was there a point where it gelled and people got it and it became?
No.
No?
The first show we got in was a disaster, and I think it was a disaster because the script was bad, and I think it was a disaster because the director was bad, and it ended up being a disaster. And but fortunately, our next show was a great script, and David Silverman directed it, and that got everybody back on board. But I remember we were walking out of that screening, and Jim said, how does it feel to be back in show business?
When did you know you had a hit on your hands?
When it premiered as the highest rated show in the history of Fox.
And how was it dealing with Fox itself as a
They
network?
were great, especially since the first episode was unairable. They didn't know when they could intervene and give notes because the process was different, but they really didn't do it anyway. The only thing, little bit of, it's not even worth criticizing them. They wanted more of a BART-oriented show, which I think Matt expected, but that was it. It's like, why not, you think we could have some more BART shows? But outside of that, they were fantastic. But, they didn't do anything, and they without a lot of their assistance, we delivered their biggest hit ever. So there's a little respect.
Were there any censorship issues whatsoever?
Minor, just words once in a while. That stuff is always funny. I know that I was very proud that I never lost a censorship or a standards and practice issue, but there were some big fights about them. I know there was a really good episode with Ringo Starr where Marge was painting his portrait and she ended up painting him nude, and the last line of the show was, "Thank you for not making fun of my genitalia." And you go, now that sounds pretty tame, doesn't it? But they didn't want, they were, it was a while ago, but still, on the Fox network and using the clinical word like that, it's not dirty, it's, but in order to keep, they said they were going to backward mask it, which means they were just going to flip the audio so that Mr. Burns said, and that was going to be on the air. And I said, no, what can I do? How can we work this? And I ultimately agreed to write a personal letter of apology to every single person that complained about the word genitalia. And I just go, there's so many idiots out there. Like, I don't know. I just didn't want to lose, And so my victory was that Mr. Burns could say genitalia. Hey, yippee, yay for Sam Simon. And so I came in on Monday and I called up Standards and Practices and I said, okay, how many letters have you got? I said 0. There was another one where Bart was at a summer camp, and the 3 kind of bad kids, Jimbo, Dolph, and Kearney, the older kind of bullies, you know them? Not Nelson, the ones that are like a few grades ahead of them. They said they were going to the girls' camp across the lake to check out the trim. And they let that stay in. And then somebody told them, that's vulgar. That's like not that's not a word that comedy writers use. It's just really dirty. So they said you can't say trim. So I kept pitching other words, and some of them, I didn't want to do. Some of them, they didn't want to, but by mistake. Well, it wasn't my mistake. I said, what if he says poon? And I say this in a letter. Will you allow us to say poon on the other side of the lake? And they go, that's fine. You go, wait a minute. I don't even want to say that. That's really dirty. And so I let it sit for a couple days. And then I got a frantic phone call like, you can't say poon. You can't say poon. And I go, but I have a letter from you that says I can say poon. They go, no. I go, well, can I say trim? Yes, you can say trim. And then Bart once, he pretended to have what's the affliction where you swear uncontrollably?
Tourette's?
Tourette's syndrome. He pretended to have Tourette's syndrome to get out of a test in school. And Standards and Practices called and they said, we've got a lot of angry letters, from people with Tourette's syndrome about Bart, pretending to have Tourette's syndrome. And I go, how do you know they're angry letters? Maybe they're nice letters, and then the Tourette's syndrome kicks in. Yeah, so that's a little Standards and Practice stuff.
You mentioned Bart. Talk a little bit about the development of some of the characters, and we'll start with Bart.
The development. I think like when you're, the only thing I can say about the development of the characters is that they all started out as real stereotype. Conceptually they started out as stereotypical brats, stupid, sweet mother, genius kid, and just the same way you saw the characters on Taxi and Cheers and the Tracy Ullman Show evolve into those moments that you were talking about that you seem to like. We just added that into the mix, and that really the revolution of the Simpsons would be that these characters had real emotion, unlike Bugs Bunny, who was very funny, but he didn't have an emotional inner life that you would go, oh my God, I went through that. I remember when that happened to me, and I feel like Bart feels right now. So the development of all the characters is identical to that, and it's really just the style of writing that Jim started on the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
What about the catchphrases? Was that something you were consciously coming up with?
The catchphrases, most underpaid, well, I don't know, nobody's underpaid anymore, but Nancy Cartwright came up with a lot of those. The, uh-oh, do you know that Bart is played by a middle-aged woman? Okay. Well, she thought of a lot of that stuff. Don't have a cowman, I caramba. That was her.
Once they became popular, were you kind of forced to keep them in?
No, we made fun of it, of course.
Another element is that chalkboard that Bart writes on.
Oy, do they still do that? Now that's got to be hard, 30 years down the road.
Did you have a hard time coming up with those during that time?
No. Because all I would do is I tell every writer to think of 8 of them and put them on my desk, and that would be it.
Were there any rules for writing The Simpsons?
No, of course not. Something so anarchic cannot have rules.
And talk about the voiceover process. You mentioned that you had wanted them to be together when they did it.
Yeah. The Simpsons would have been a wonderful radio show, and that's not to say that the visuals don't add an enormous amount to the show, but the soundtracks were fantastic to listen to. They were so, especially with the music in them and the sound effects, you almost see it while you're listening to them, and I just think it would have been a great radio show. And a better TV show. But a lot of that, and they don't do it anymore, to be honest, and I can tell when I listen to it, and I think it's a shame. But when actors are really looking at each other and overlapping and really playing off each other, I think it, especially in the early days when the animation wasn't as good, it would, you'd have like like if you were to look at the scene without the voice going on, you would think you were looking at some leaden, not much going on scene, and then these voice tracks were superb. They were really good.
And did you cast the voices as well?
No, they were cast, Matt cast Yardley and Nancy, but then they used, just for money, they used, to save money, they used Dan and Marge. And then I cast Harry Shearer, and later on we added Hank Azaria. Matt and I cast Hank Azaria.
How long would it take from the conception of an episode to being on air?
I don't know what it is now, but it used to be more than a year. And they go like, well, and the reason it could take more than a year to do an episode of a show was that you'd be working on the end of a season and beginning of a season at the same time. But it's also the easiest job I ever had, so it wasn't like it was hard.
In what way? I mean,
Just the hours, it was just fun.
Still on The Simpsons. Did you have a favorite character to write for?
Homer, probably. I think the show had an overall sensibility that, like, if you had the voice of the show, you could write for any character. They were all, to be honest, like, there are other shows that I've worked on that you go, if you got to do a Danny episode on Taxi, you'd be happy because it's Danny DeVito, and like some of the other ones, you knew it was going to be good, but maybe you weren't as excited about it. I don't think on The Simpsons anybody ever felt that way. I think, like, the only one that isn't, like, even Maggie would be a fun challenge, when she was heavily featured in something, and that would be a lot of fun. So, I'd say, like, my favorite character is Homer. My favorite character to write for, I wouldn't. I actually think one of the charms of The Simpsons is that you have the three greatest voiceover actors of all time playing 150 different characters, which means, like, if you write an episode about Apu, Hank Azaria is going to do it. If you write an episode about Grandpa, Dan Castellaneta is going to do it. So you're going to get a performance that is going to make you proud of your words. So it's not a matter of, like, that an actor's going to let you down. So I think everybody, I don't even recall, like, people being like, oh, this script, this one's killing me, nothing happened. I don't remember any of that, and it's a pretty common thing on a sitcom. Like, I got stuck with a bad assignment, but that never happened.
What made Homer your favorite?
Because he's an everyman. Because every stupid thing, in real life, I'm smarter than Homer. And I have a better job. Well, I had a better job. And I'm more successful in a lot of ways. But the stupidest things I've ever done are things that Homer literally has done on the show. And that raging child that is within him is something that a lot of people, including myself, can relate to.
Historically, there's been a lot of talk about you and Matt having some difficulties working together.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
It's not an issue for me. I know I read, I still read stuff in the paper, and I've come to understand and feel bad about. I'll give you one example. I used to tell the writers, "Hey, we're 13 and out," and what I meant by that was, we don't have to reverse engineer a show to try and make a hit. We have an order for 13 episodes. We're going to get to do whatever we want. Let's try and make 13 great episodes that we can take out our Betamax tapes and show to our friends that we did this show called The Simpsons in 1782 or whenever it was. Now, I've actually heard like him imitate me. We're 13 and out. We're 13 and out. But I understand now that to him, that meant that I thought the show was going to be a failure. That's not what I meant. I meant that it was like, hey, relax. Take the pressure off. Let's have fun here. Let's do a great show. And also that this was his break. This was his one chance. If The Simpsons didn't work, I would get to do the George Carlin show or something else, after that. So, I think there were some misunderstandings, but I don't think it should really, as far as getting credit for the show, I never thought that I did it by myself. This thing, I'll tell you how valuable I was to the show, that it's gone on for 27 years without me. If that's any indication of how much they needed me to do it, which I had no delusions of. I think I used to think I didn't get enough credit and that I was underpaid. Now I think not only am I overpaid, I think everybody's overpaid, and not really. They shouldn't get. No one should give any money back. But everybody got rich, and everybody should just drop the other nonsense. It just doesn't matter anymore.
When you thought that you weren't getting enough credit, what did that mean to you? What were...
I was just reading that other people were doing what I did in the paper, and it bothered me. And I thought it was bad for me.
How involved was Matt in the writer's room in writing the actual episodes?
Has he done an interview?
Not yet.
Oh, okay. Matt's time was not, Matt was not strictly a writer on the staff. Matt was overseeing and protecting the characters. His notes, he was always welcome. His notes and critiques were always taken very seriously. People forget the merchandise of that show was the biggest thing that ever hit TV when it started. Matt was the emperor of that, so all those T-shirts that said "underachiever" and "proud of it," that was his brainchild. There was a lot of stuff to be done, and he was the voice of the show. We didn't allow our voiceover actors to do appearances, so he did all the publicity for the show. Whenever he was there, he was valuable, particularly in keeping the show not an animated Married with Children. That I would say is Matt's greatest contribution. When he would say, "I hate that, that's sour," he was always right, and we always changed it.
See, so who was the last person to see the scripts before they went into production? To kind of sign off on them?
The scripts were never not in production. We would dub all new scenes at the very last minute. There's shots of like Marge and Homer in bed that have been used 20 times, where we just put new words into their mouths. So there was never a final. I mean, the last dub, I guess, would be the final sign-off. But I think we went back a few times and changed stuff after that, too.
What is your favorite episode of the series?
Without a doubt, my favorite episode of the show is the first season show where Marge considers having an affair with Albert Brooks. It won the Emmy for the show the first season, and it was the first time, even though I loved what we were doing, it was the first time I saw that this show could be something beyond what a normal sitcom could do, because this was a story about a frustrated housewife who meets someone romantic, and she wants to have an affair, and you're on her side. And I just thought, this is groundbreaking. And she decides not to do it. And everyone said the ending wouldn't work, and I was like, that was a big fight to do that. And again, it was just like we just completely ripped off Officer and a Gentleman, but it like worked just as good for, maybe better for us than it did for Richard Gere and Deborah Winger. And mainly I remember the rough cut of it, just going like, what have we done here? This is something really special. So it is that show. And I'm not saying it's the best episode of The Simpsons. I'm not saying it's the funniest episode. I'm not, none of that. I'm just saying that's my favorite one. Who wrote that? Swartzwelder?
I think maybe I'm not.
It was called,
I don't have that in my notes.
Swartzwelder wrote it for a Swedish bowling instructor. I have no idea why. But that was the great thing about having a writing staff like that. I wouldn't have to, I go, well, why is he Swedish? I just go, if he thinks it's funny the guy's Swedish, it's good enough for me. So it was called Bjorn to be Wild, BJO with umlaut or something over the O, RN to be wild. And then Albert came in and he said, don't you think the guy should be French? I mean, the French are lovers and blah, blah, blah. I go, well, Albert, if you want to do a French accent, you should do a French accent. So I tossed John's idea down the road, like, Albert, I trust Albert more than I trust John Churchwell. So he did a French accent. So then the show became Jacques to be Wild. So it's listed as Jacques to be Wild on like the DVD, which makes no sense whatsoever, but it's just because they changed the name Bjorn to Jacques. And then I think in some places it says Life in the Fast Lane, but that was never the title of
Yeah, and it was
the show.
written by John.
Yeah, he's a good writer, that John Schwartzwell.
What does no one know about The Simpsons and its development?
Don't
Is there
ask
any
me.
story you haven't told?
I know everything, I don't know.
And why did you?
You can edit that one out.
Why did you leave the show?
I left the show because I was, my job had changed into something else. I wasn't working full-time on The Simpsons. They wanted me to be head of a company. I'm not an executive. And I wanted to do things on my own. And then very quickly, I became really rich. So then, instead of wanting to do things on my own, I didn't want to do things at all.
Now, how did you get that deal where you were still earning, you were still listed as executive producer
Yes.
after you left? How did you get that deal?
It was just mutually agreed upon. But I got more. I get my salary and my points. I get everything I'm entitled to from that show. I have no. I've done. Well, another answer to your question is they didn't think it was going to last this long. Someone would have said like, well, will you agree that in 20 years you won't make your percentage of syndication sales? First of all, I would have said no. But they could have asked that question, but they didn't because they assumed shows went 7 or 8 years. So part of it was the studio and people feeling there is just a certain limited lifetime for a show, even though this is animated, guys. The characters don't get older. You can record them off of the thing. All this other stuff, which really was a constant issue in play for the show, and no one ever saw the upside of it. They would go like, well, we can syndicate it at 5 o'clock, but we can't syndicate it at 11:30. And you go, why? How do you know? It's pretty adult. Maybe people will like it. Why don't you find out? So that was like that. And you go, well, shows last 7 or 8 years at the very longest range. You go, well, this is different than that. Maybe this could last longer. They never thought that way. And they're kind of paid to. That's supposed to be where they're, like the studio's supposed to be intelligent.
Was it always decided too that it would be, the show would be always, they would always be the same age, nothing would change on that end, or was there a discussion about that?
I think that's just general sitcom. I think now I mean, now I guess everything is supposed to have taken place in the same year. But we used to talk about that on Cheers. You know, it would progress slowly, but we wonder, like, you know, Carla, you know, she has this issue with her thing, and we go, well, she's probably talking about that with, you know, in a different episode. You know, she's concerned about that. She's thinking about that. But this one lasts a month, and that one lasted 2 months. So there is some overlap. You just don't see it on the show. But if someone said, like, how would you like to get some new life into The Simpsons, I would just reboot it. I would just start it over. And just start it over in 2014 or 2015. And if you want to do some of the same stories, you can do some of the same stories, but just, you know, just make it an average family now, because it's a lot different back then.
Oh, so you mean like things like cell phones and that kind
Well,
of
they
thing?
must have
or-
cell phones, don't they?
Now they probably do, but I mean, like early on, you're saying to reboot it.
Right,
that way.
yeah. And just the way Star Trek did it.
Mm-hmm.
Just do a new version where things don't have to turn out the same way that they did before.
I get it. Okay, let's move on to the George Carlin show.
Okay.
You were creator, executive producer. How did that come about for you?
Sandy, you gotta cut this out. Sandy Grushow put us together because he was a fan of mine at Fox. And they wanted to do a show with George Carlin.
Were you a fan of his?
I'm not a stand-up comedian fan. It's a little like, for some reason, it's a little like the way I am with sitcoms. Like, I can't stand it unless people are really good at it. And the people that I think are really good at it are few and far between. But George Carlin was one of them. And clearly a genius. And with every tool of comedy at his beck and call, if you could see this guy on stage, he'd make funny faces. He would talk funny. He would use funny voices. He would have funny ideas. He would do just anything you can do to be funny. This guy had it in his arsenal. And he was just awesome to me. And then thought-provoking. You know, you could just go, oh my God, I never thought of that. Oh my God, that's so true. Oh my God. And so I was a huge fan of George Carlin. You know, I would say this, that who is the greatest stand-up comedian of all time? Well, you can't really do that, but you can go, who was it? You know, it was Richard Pryor for a while. It was Sam Kinison for a while. But in every one of those discussions, George Carlin is right up there for 50 years. 50 years. And some of his greatest material was you know, before he died. So, a huge fan of George Carlin's.
How did your sensibilities mesh in terms of creating a sitcom?
I thought they meshed really well. I thought we always had a really good time working together. We had one concept for the show, and he went on Howard Stern and talked about it, and I called and I said, I don't know, that didn't sound so good. He goes, I know, I agree with you. So we thought of something else. And we thought of the concept for the show was, and incidentally, this is another hit show that got canceled. There was a guy named John Matoyan that came in that wanted to clean up the Fox network, and And our show was getting really good ratings. We got really good numbers. We were ahead of the X-Files, which they picked up because that was more what they wanted to do. I think the cancellation affected George's attitude towards the work in retrospect, because he was always just a complete doll, and I know that he had some bitterness about the show after, that I heard later on, which made me feel really bad, because we got along really well, and I loved him, and I consider it a very special period of my life. And during the show, like, we would get together on Sunday, sometimes just on the phone, and punch up the scripts together. And it would have been a huge tragedy if all George Carlin ever did was punch up sitcom scripts, but he was just as good at it as anybody that ever did it. He was hilarious, and it would be like, I got one here. I go, okay, great. I go, wait, I got another one for the same spot. I go, oh, George, so which one do you like better? It's like, he was just fantastic.
How is he as an actor?
Well, he's a horrible actor. And the thing that I thought I did that was great was I freed him to be George Carlin on the stage. I said, you don't have to say the words. You can say anything you want. You can go anywhere you want. I had 2 cameras following him. And all he had to do was walk out and feel his way through the scene and do what he wanted to do. And I thought he was great on the show, but he wasn't acting the way a lot of sitcom actors had to act.
Do you think that it captured his sensibilities?
Yes.
It did.
Yeah, I do.
The next show you worked on was the Drew Carey Show.
It's what?
The Drew Carey Show, that was the next show that you...
I was a consultant on that, yeah.
Yeah. How did that come about for you?
Well, Drew was on the, I became friends with Drew because he did an episode of the George Carlin Show. Bruce Helford, who I'm sure you've interviewed.
Not yet.
Not yet. You will. I always wonder, I know he's got more shows than me by far, but I think I have more episodes than him. Very prolific. You know who he is.
Of course.
Yeah. And he's a fantastic showrunner and a great person. And he was at Warner Brothers with a deal to do a show with Drew Carey, and he wanted to see if Drew could act. So we gave Drew a part on the George Carlin Show, and so I became friends with Drew.
Talk about working on the show itself.
It was kind of rough because I thought they had a great cast, and I thought the show could be a lot better more of the time. But really, if you take 3 or 4 episodes of the Drew Carey Show from every season, they were really funny. It was really funny, and I think people got that everybody liked each other and was having fun on the show. And I think that Drew is the best role model star of a show there could ever be. His generosity and appreciation for the people that work for him. I mean, you've heard about it, I'm sure. This cruises and renting cruise ships so people can, you can show the entire cast and crew, how much he appreciates them.
Okay,
and the hardest working guy on his show.
stop there to change the tape.